2:17 a.m., she realized. At 2:17 a.m., she realized something that would never leave her. The man lying beside her could hear her breathing change. He could hear the fear in her voice, and he chose to turn away anyway. She wasn't asking for love. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for help. By the time the sun came up, there was no one left to answer. This is not a ghost story. There are no shadows in corners, no footsteps in empty halls. This is a story about what happens when someone slowly disappears, while the person closest to them pretends not to notice. Emily used to believe silence meant safety. She believed that if a home was quiet, then it must be peaceful. No shouting meant no problems. No arguments meant no damage. That's what people said. Some couples don't fight. Some people are just calm. So when her marriage grew quiet, Emily told herself everything was fine. They lived in a small house on a quiet street in Ohio. The kind of street where porch lights turned on at the same time every evening. Where neighbors waved but never really talked. Where nothing ever seemed to happen. The house was simple. White walls, clean windows, a front door that never slammed. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where people felt safe. Daniel worked long hours as a project manager. He left early, came home late, and always looked tired. Emily worked from home. Her days passed quietly. Emails, coffee growing cold beside her laptop, the sound of the clock ticking louder as the hours went by. They had been married for 7 years, no children, no chaos, no visible cracks, just habits. Daniel woke up before sunrise. Emily made coffee without asking if he wanted it. He drank it without noticing. Their mornings were short exchanges spoken out of routine. Good morning. Morning. Have a good day. You too. The words sounded polite, but empty. At night, they ate dinner together at the same table. Sometimes the television filled the silence. Sometimes nothing did. Emily noticed the quiet long before Daniel did. Or maybe he noticed it and decided not to care. He stopped asking how her day had been. Stopped looking up when she entered a room. Stopped noticing when she went quiet. When she laughed at something on her phone, he didn't ask why. When she sighed, he didn't ask what was wrong. At first, Emily told herself he was just tired. Everyone gets tired. But tiredness, when ignored long enough, becomes permanent. They slept in the same bed, but not together. Their backs faced each other. A small space between them that felt larger every night. Emily often lay awake listening to Daniel breathe. Slow, steady, unbothered. She wondered when his breathing had stopped matching hers, or if it ever really had. She remembered the beginning, how he used to reach for her hand while driving, how he listened when she spoke, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Back then, if she said she didn't feel well, he would ask questions. Now, he just nodded. Emily didn't want much. She didn't want gifts. She didn't want trips or surprises. She just wanted to feel like she existed in the same room as her husband. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, she scrolled through old messages on her phone. Messages from years ago, messages where Daniel used her name, messages where he asked how she was feeling. She wondered where that man had gone, and if she had somehow pushed him away without realizing it. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, Emily finally said what she had been holding inside. "Do you ever feel like we're just roommates?" Daniel didn't look away from the screen. Number, one word, no curiosity, no follow-up, no concern. Emily nodded, even though something tightened in her chest. That night, she learned something important. The most frightening response isn't anger. It's indifference. After that, Emily stopped asking questions. Stopped expecting comfort, stopped hoping things would change. She became quieter, more careful. She cooked dinner. She cleaned the house. She smiled when it felt expected. But inside, something fragile was beginning to crack. Her sleep grew restless. Her heart raced at night. Her hands trembled for no clear reason. A pressure settled in her chest that never fully left. She told herself it was stress. She didn't want to be dramatic. She didn't want to be a problem. So she stayed silent until the night everything ended. It was raining that night. The steady, patient kind of rain that made the world feel smaller, quieter. The clock beside the bed glowed red in the darkness. 2:12 a.m. Emily woke up suddenly. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart was beating too fast. She tried to take a deep breath. It didn't help. Fear crept into her chest, sharp and unfamiliar. She turned toward Daniel. He was asleep. For a moment, she hesitated. She didn't want to bother him. Didn't want to hear that sigh. Didn't want to feel like an inconvenience. But something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. The numbers on the clock changed. 2:17 a.m. Emily whispered his name. Daniel. No response. Her voice shook. "Daniel, please." He shifted slightly, but didn't wake up. Her hand trembled as she reached for his arm. Her fingers barely touched his skin. He pulled away. "I'm tired," he muttered. "Go back to sleep." Emily froze. Her chest tightened even more. "I don't feel right," she said softly. "I'm scared." Daniel exhaled, irritated. "You're always anxious," he said. "It's late." Then he turned his back to her. In that moment, Emily understood something that would stay with her forever. If something happened to her right then, he wouldn't notice. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry out. She lay there in silence, listening to the rain, listening to her own uneven heartbeat. She thought about all the times she had stayed quiet to keep the peace, all the times she had convinced herself that silence was love. And as the minutes passed, the fear didn't fade. It grew. Emily closed her eyes, not to sleep, but because she was too tired to feel invisible anymore. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last time she would ever ask him for help. Emily didn't sleep. Her eyes stayed closed, but her mind refused to slow down. Each breath felt shallow, like the air wasn't reaching deep enough. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, then too slowly, as if her body couldn't decide what to do. Daniel's back was turned toward her. The space between them felt larger than the bed itself, larger than the room. She tried to steady her breathing. In, out. It didn't work. Her heart kept racing, then pausing, then racing again. A strange warmth spread through her arms, followed by a cold numbness in her fingers. She wondered if this was how panic began. Quietly, without warning, she thought about waking him again, about shaking his shoulder harder this time, about saying the words louder. But another thought followed immediately. What if he sighs again? What if he tells me I'm overreacting? What if he turns away like before? The fear of being ignored felt heavier than the fear in her chest. So she stayed still. Outside, the rain continued, tapping softly against the windows. It sounded patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Emily stared into the darkness and remembered the first night they slept in this house. They had laid awake, talking in whispers so the sound wouldn't echo. They talked about paint colors, about furniture they couldn't afford yet, about a future that felt endless. She remembered how safe she felt then, how certain. Now the house felt like it was holding its breath. Around 3 a.m, Emily slowly sat up. The room tilted slightly, and she had to pause until it steadied. She pressed her hand against her chest. Something wasn't right. Her heartbeat felt uneven now, too fast, then suddenly heavy. She thought about calling for help. An ambulance, a neighbor's door, anyone. But hesitation crept in. What if it's nothing? What if I panic and wake everyone up for no reason? What if Daniel is angry in the morning? She had learned, over years, that needing help felt like asking for too much. So she waited. Emily swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood carefully. The floor felt cold beneath her feet, sending a shiver through her legs. As she walked toward the bathroom, her vision blurred. The hallway seemed longer than usual. She reached out and steadied herself against the wall, breathing through the dizziness. In the bathroom, she flipped on the light and stared at her reflection. She barely recognized herself. Her skin looked pale. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. Her lips pressed together as if she were holding something in. She splashed cold water on her face, hoping it would wake her body up. It didn't. Her heart skipped hard, then thudded painfully. Emily gripped the edge of the sink and closed her eyes. Please, she thought, just calm down. She stood there, counting the seconds or minutes. Time felt strange, stretched thin. Eventually, she made her way back to the bedroom. Daniel hadn't moved. She lay down slowly, careful not to disturb him, as if her presence itself might be an inconvenience. The clock glowed softly in the dark. 3:46 a.m. Emily watched the numbers change 1 minute at a time. She thought about her mother's voice, calm and steady. If something feels wrong, listen to your body. Emily wondered when she had stopped trusting her own. By the time the sky outside began to lighten, exhaustion settled deep in her bones. Not the kind sleep could fix. The kind that comes from holding everything in for too long. Daniel's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. He groaned, rolled over, and sat up, rubbing his eyes. Emily didn't move. "You're still asleep?" he said casually. No answer. He shrugged and stood up. In the bathroom, he showered, brushed his teeth, checked his phone. Emails, meetings, deadlines. The house stayed quiet. When he returned to the bedroom, Emily was still lying in the same position. Something about that made him pause. "Emily," he said. No response. He reached out and touched her shoulder. It felt cold, too cold. A strange confusion crossed his face before fear arrived. He shook her gently, then harder. "Emily." Nothing. The room seemed to shrink around him. His breathing grew shallow as he grabbed his phone and called for help, his voice sounding distant, unfamiliar even to himself. Minutes later, flashing lights filled the room, blue, red. Paramedics moved quickly, asking questions Daniel struggled to answer. How long had she been like this? Did she complain of pain? Had she said anything during the night? Fragments of the night rushed back. Her voice, soft, shaking. "I don't feel right. I'm scared." One of the paramedics met his eyes gently. "She was in distress for hours," he said quietly. "If help had come sooner." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Daniel sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside him. The house was silent again, but this silence felt different. Final. The house didn't feel like his anymore. Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. The steam had faded long ago. The surface was still, just like everything else. The paramedics had left. The police had asked their questions. Forms were signed. Words were spoken. None of it felt real. Emily's shoes were still by the door, placed neatly like she always did. Her coat hung on the chair, half folded. A mug sat in the sink, unfinished. Small signs of a life that had stopped without warning. Daniel stood up and walked slowly through the house, touching things without knowing why. The counter where she chopped vegetables. The couch where she sat quietly, waiting for him to notice. waiting. The bedroom felt wrong. The bed was still unmade. One pillow slightly indented. Daniel sat down and pressed his palm against the sheets. Cold. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if the cold might spread. His mind replayed the night again, and again, and again. Her voice, careful, soft. I don't feel right. I'm scared. He remembered how tired he had felt, how turning away had seemed easier than listening. At the time, it hadn't felt cruel, just practical. Now, it felt unforgivable. Daniel stood up abruptly and walked into the hallway, trying to escape the weight in his chest. Something caught his eye on the floor. Emily's phone. It lay near the wall, face down. He picked it up slowly. The screen lit up as he touched it. An unsent message filled the display. I don't want to be a problem. I just don't want to feel alone anymore. Daniel's throat tightened. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, the phone still glowing in his hand. He scrolled through her notes, short entries, fragments of thoughts she never said out loud. I feel like I'm disappearing. I don't know how to ask for help without feeling ashamed. My chest hurts again tonight. Each line landed harder than the last. There were signs everywhere. He had just chosen not to see them. Later that day, at the hospital, a doctor spoke gently, carefully choosing words. A cardiac event, stress-related, ignored symptoms. If she had come in earlier, the outcome might have been different. Might. That word stayed with Daniel. Might meant there had been time. Might meant there had been a chance. On the drive home, traffic lights blurred past him. Red, green, yellow. Time moving forward without asking permission. At home again, the silence felt heavier. Daniel wandered from room to room, unsure of where to stop. He paused in front of a framed photo on the wall. Emily was smiling in it. Not the polite smile she used around others. A real one. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen that smile in person. I didn't know, he whispered, but the words sounded empty. That night, Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice again. Not angry, not accusing, just scared. Around 2 a.m, he sat up suddenly. The room felt too familiar, too quiet. He glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. The same time. His stomach dropped. He turned toward her side of the bed. Empty. Daniel lay back down, his heart pounding. Emily had been awake, alone, afraid, and he had been right there, close enough to hear her breathe, too far away to listen. For the first time, Daniel understood what true loneliness felt like, and it terrified him. The days after Emily's death passed slowly, like time had forgotten how to move forward. Daniel woke up each morning expecting to hear something. A sound from the kitchen, a soft step in the hallway. Anything. There was nothing. Family came and went. Friends stood awkwardly in doorways, offering help they didn't know how to give. "I'm so sorry," they said. She was so kind. "Let us know if you need anything." Daniel nodded, thanked them, watched them leave. Their voices faded, but the silence stayed. He stopped sleeping in the bedroom. The empty side of the bed felt unbearable, like it was accusing him every time he looked at it. Instead, he slept on the couch with the lights on, the television murmuring softly through the night. Not because he was watching, but because the sound made the house feel less empty. Even then, sleep didn't come easily. Memories slipped through the noise. Emily standing in the doorway, waiting for him to look up. Emily sitting quietly beside him, hoping he would notice. Emily lying awake in the dark, afraid. During the day, Daniel tried to stay busy. He cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning, organized drawers that had already been organized. In one of those drawers, he found a small notebook. Emily's handwriting filled the pages. Daniel sat down slowly and began to read. "I tried to talk to him today," one entry said. "He seemed busy. Maybe tomorrow." Another page. "I don't know how to explain this loneliness without sounding ungrateful." Page after page, her thoughts unfolded. Her fear, her confusion, her hope that things would somehow change. "I don't want to leave," one line read. "I just want him to see me." Daniel pressed the notebook against his chest, his breathing unsteady. He thought about all the moments he had brushed aside as unimportant, all the times he had chosen convenience over connection. At the funeral, Daniel stood beside the casket, his hands clasped tightly together. Emily looked peaceful, too peaceful. People spoke about her warmth, her kindness, how she always listened. Daniel wondered how someone who gave so much could feel so alone. When the service ended and everyone left, Daniel stayed behind. The cemetery was quiet. Wind moved gently through the trees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have listened." The words disappeared into the air. No response came back. That night, Daniel returned to the house alone. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, unsure if he wanted to step inside. Eventually, he did. The house felt colder than before. He sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the dark hallway. Then he heard something, a sound, soft, almost like a breath. Daniel froze. The house was still. He told himself it was nothing, just his mind trying to fill the silence. But the feeling didn't leave. Around midnight, Daniel stood and walked toward the bedroom. The door was slightly open. He hadn't been inside since that morning. His heart pounded as he pushed it open. The room was unchanged. The bed, The nightstand, the clock, everything was exactly where it had been. Yet the air felt heavy. Daniel sat on the bed and stared at Emily's pillow. And without warning, the weight of everything finally broke through. Tears came hard and fast. Not quiet tears, deep, shaking sobs. He covered his face, his shoulders trembling. "I didn't know," he said aloud. "I didn't know." But somewhere deep inside, a thought surfaced. You knew enough. Daniel stayed there until exhaustion pulled him under. For the first time since Emily died, he fell asleep in the bedroom. And for the first time, he dreamed of her. She stood at the foot of the bed, looking exactly as she had that last night. Not angry, not sad, just tired. She opened her mouth as if to speak. Daniel woke up, gasping for air. The clock glowed red. 2:17 a.m. The room was empty, but the feeling lingered. Emily wasn't gone yet. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed long after the dream faded. His breathing was uneven. His hands trembled slightly. The image of Emily standing there refused to leave his mind. Not accusing, not angry, just tired. That look hurt more than anger ever could. From that night on, Daniel began waking up at the same time, every night. 2:17 a.m. At first, he told himself it was coincidence. Grief does strange things to the mind, but nights don't repeat themselves without reason. He tried sleeping pills. They left him groggy, but awake. He tried leaving the television on. The voices faded, and the silence rushed back in stronger than before. Each night, he woke with the same feeling, a pressure in his chest, a sense that something unfinished was waiting for him. Not a presence, a memory. Daniel returned to work, but his body showed up before his mind did. He stared at his screen without reading, attended meetings without hearing. People spoke carefully around him, as if he might break. At night, the house became unbearable again. Daniel started talking out loud, not to anyone in the room, but to the space where Emily used to be. "I didn't understand," he said one night in the kitchen. "I thought things were fine." The words echoed softly off the walls. He waited. Nothing answered. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Daniel noticed a sound. Not a voice, not footsteps, a soft, uneven rhythm. His heart began to pound. He followed the sound slowly, afraid of what he might find. It led him to the bedroom. The nightstand drawer was slightly open. Daniel pulled it out. Inside lay Emily's old smartwatch. He hadn't seen it in weeks. The screen was dark. He held it for a moment before pressing the button. The display lit up. A heart rate log appeared. Daniel's breath caught. The last recorded activity was from the night Emily died. The timestamp was clear. 2:17 a.m. His hands shook as he scrolled. The numbers spiked sharply. Higher, faster. Then they stayed there for minutes. Too many minutes. And then, nothing. Daniel lowered himself to the floor, his back against the bed. She hadn't just been scared. She had been fighting to breathe, fighting to stay awake, fighting for time, fighting alone. Daniel pressed the watch against his chest, his throat tight. "I was right there," he whispered. "I was right there." That night, Daniel didn't turn on the lights. He lay in bed, staring into the darkness, waiting. At 2:17 a.m., his eyes snapped open. The air felt heavy again. And then he heard it. Not a sound from the room. A thought, clear, soft. "I tried." Daniel closed his eyes tightly. "I know," he said quietly. "I know." But knowing didn't change what had happened. Some moments don't give you a second chance. They give you a lifetime to understand what you lost. And Daniel was only beginning to understand. Daniel stopped trying to escape the nights. He stopped fighting sleep, stopped counting the hours until morning, stopped pretending that time alone would fix anything. Instead, he let the nights come. Every evening followed the same quiet pattern, a simple dinner he barely tasted. Lights dimmed early, the house settling into silence. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watchful. At work, people said he looked thinner, quieter, older. Daniel didn't disagree. He moved through his days slowly, carefully, as if sudden movements might break something inside him. One afternoon, his phone rang. Emily's sister. Her voice was hesitant, uncertain. "I found something," she said. "I think you should have it." They met a few days later in a small cafe. She slid a thin envelope across the table. Emily's handwriting was on the front. Daniel stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "it means I never found the courage to say these things out loud." Daniel's chest tightened. "I don't blame you. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but not meaning to still hurts." His hands shook as he read. "I kept hoping you would notice me without me having to beg. I was tired of asking to matter." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. "I didn't want to leave. I just didn't know how to stay invisible anymore." Daniel folded the letter slowly and placed it back into the envelope. That night, he returned home earlier than usual. He sat alone in the bedroom with the lights off. The letter rested on the nightstand. The clock glowed softly. 2:16 a.m. His heartbeat quickened. He didn't look away. 2:17 a.m. The room felt colder, not in temperature, in weight. Daniel spoke into the darkness. "I hear you now," he said. "I'm listening." The silence stretched, but for the first time it felt different, not empty, heavy, like something had finally been acknowledged. Daniel closed his eyes. Memories surfaced gently. Emily smiling in the kitchen. Emily laughing softly at a movie. Emily waiting in doorways. Waiting. He understood then. Emily had never wanted perfection. Never wanted grand apologies. She had wanted presence, and presence was the one thing he had withheld. Daniel stayed there until morning light slipped through the curtains. When the sun rose, something inside him felt settled, not healed, finished. He packed a bag that afternoon, not to run away, but to leave the house that held too many echoes. Before closing the door, Daniel looked back one last time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I won't ignore it again." The door closed behind him. For the first time in months, Daniel slept through the night. But somewhere, in a quiet house on a quiet street, the silence remained. Waiting. Daniel never returned to that house. He moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing special, just enough space to exist without echoes. People assumed leaving helped him heal. It didn't. Healing was loud, messy, forgiving. What followed Daniel was quieter, understanding. At night, when the world slowed and distractions faded, the truth always found him. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades quietly, moment by moment, ignored word by ignored word. Daniel learned that lesson too late. He tried to be different afterward, kinder at work, more attentive with people. But sometimes change is just regret learning how to behave. Years passed. Emily's belongings stayed in boxes, unopened, not because Daniel wanted to forget her, but because opening them meant facing how close she had been and how far away he had let her become. On the anniversary of her death, Daniel did something he had avoided for years. He returned to the street where the house still stood. New owners lived there now. The porch light was on, just like it used to be. Daniel stood across the street, hands in his pockets, watching. The house looked smaller than he remembered, quieter. He checked the time on his phone. 2:16 a.m. His breath caught. He waited. 2:17 a.m. Nothing happened. No tightening in his chest. No rush of memory. No sound in the dark. Just silence. And in that silence, Daniel finally understood. Emily had never been haunting him. She never needed to. What haunted him was the moment he chose comfort over care, silence over love, sleep over listening. That was the real ghost. Daniel whispered into the empty street, "I heard you too late." The words didn't echo. They didn't linger. They disappeared, just like chances do. Daniel turned and walked away, carrying something he would never put down. Love doesn't always end with anger. Sometimes it ends with someone turning their back. And by the time they turn around again, there's no one left to hear them. Behind him, the quiet house stood still, and inside it, nothing waited anymore. Not forgiveness, not anger, only silence.